One of the amazing things about doing this role and pulling together this alliance of people who care about family homelessness is that we've had the privilege of working with some amazing journalists. And journalists have the power to change how government think about things and how the public think about things. And I'm really privileged that we're going to have some thoughts from them about what does their role look like within this sector, how can they use their voices, what can we do to support them. And I have to say, our first big breakthrough about the COT campaign, we put together the COT campaign, and we'd been lobbying the Conservative government to make COTs compulsory in temporary accommodation. And it was just a pain. It wasn't really getting anywhere, and it was like going round and round in circles. And there was a lovely BBC journalist who wrote a very short piece on the website, and that was enough to shift the minister to make a decision. And so sometimes it can be working as a proper team, multidisciplinary, that gets things over the line. And so these guys are absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to pass on to Sam, and I'm going to carry you more sugar. And enjoy the session.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you. My colleagues come and join us on stage. Please put your hands together for Kath Swindells from Inside Housing, Ethan Davies from the Manchester Evening News, and Tarah Welsh from the BBC. So we're going to have an interesting conversation about the work that all these three are doing in their respective fields around the issues of children in temporary accommodation. Ethan's got to run at about 1:30 because he's got to go talk to the council to tell them what to do.
It's as fun as it sounds.
And so I'll ask a few questions, but then we really want to have a conversation with you guys about, so it's your turn to grill journalists, so you can ask them whatever you want. We've got our Q&A microphone in the corner, so if you want to ask a question later, please go up to it. You don't have to go one by one, just form an orderly queue, and then we can ask the questions from there. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We'll go down just one at a time. Give us a little bit of intro of who you are, what kind of stuff that you're working on, and maybe just like a piece that's around temporary accommodation that you're just really proud of that you've done recently, or maybe one that you're working on at the moment that you're proud of. Catherine, I'll pass to you first.
Amazing, thank you so much. And I hope the questions aren't too hard. I'm not getting used to being this side of the microphone. But I'm Kath, I'm Deputy Features Editor at Inside Housing magazine. So that's hopefully some readers here, but it's a specialist magazine that writes about social housing and homelessness. And I think like really excited to be here with these guys and hopefully can shed a bit of light on what I hope specialist magazines can do to kind of drill in a bit deeper and kind of get more into kind of solutions-focused campaigning journalism on some of this stuff. So a big project that I have probably had sort of quite a lot of you about and worked over the last couple of years on is a big data project documenting the number of families with young children, so aged under 5, toddlers and babies, in temporary accommodation, because I realised that the government data didn't distinguish between a 14-year-old and a 4-year-old, and obviously we all know kind of the impact developmentally is particularly significant with that younger age group. So kind of set about FOIing every council and putting them in a big list that you could search and kind of name and shame, and did that every quarter. And I thought it was important obviously to highlight the 35,000 families with toddlers and babies in temporary accommodation, but also my goal was really in particular to highlight the data gap that at the beginning of the project, a third of councils just said they were not able to tell me the answer, which I think is frankly outrageous. And then after about 9 months, it was about a fifth. So there were major councils that had kind of changed their reporting mechanisms. And then after a year, excitingly, the government stepped in and is now mandating that they publish that data. So every quarter, that's now, you can get it, it's called additional tables. We'll go and have a look. So yeah, I think that's, I hope, kind of an example of Inside Housing, some of the stuff that we do. It's maybe a little bit different to some of the national press to kind of really drill in on something quite specific and hopefully make change happen.
And I just want to add on a point on that. It's really exciting that the government has now released the age breakdowns of all the children in temporary accommodation per local authority as well. Because the more data we have, the more policy you can do and the more change that you can make. So you can go onto the government website and type in homeless statistics, find that there's a big, long, complicated spreadsheet that you can just lose yourself hours in. And me and my team have been geeking over it in the past couple of weeks. of saying, oh, they've got how many babies in their area? Well, that's interesting. Or actually, their numbers have gone up or their numbers have gone down. So it just helps give us a broader definition of the scale of the issue. So thank you for your work on that, and it's incredible to see that change has happened.
So hi everyone, my name's Ethan. I am a local democracy reporter for the Manchester Evening News, so that means I cover Manchester Council and professionally follow Andy Burnham around for a living at the moment, which can be fun. But what sort of I'm here to talk about today is that we've got a campaign ongoing calling on Andy Burnham to implement a free bus pass for children in Greater Manchester who are housed in temporary accommodation if they're more than a 30-minute walk away from school, because as I'm sure everyone here knows, you move miles away when you're placed in temporary accommodation, and then the existing DFT guidance says that you can only get a free home to school transport if you're more than 2 miles if you're primary or 3 miles if you're secondary, essentially, and there's no school nearer to where you are now, which is, I guess, fine in the countryside, but in a city where there are lots of schools, essentially means there's no mechanism for you to get a free transport there unless there isn't another school, which obviously there isn't in this case. So essentially there are two choices for families who are homeless: either pay for buses that you never used to have to because you went from being a 5-minute walk around the corner to 2 or 3 buses away, or just move your kid away from the support network. And we think that's wrong. We think that the whole point of devolution is that the mayor should listen to the people that he or she represents, and that's why we're calling on Andy Burnham to implement this new bus pass. The vibe we've got from him so far is that he's in favour of it. He's basically just working out to pay for it. And I hope at some point there'll be a QR code on screen, and that will take you to a change.org petition. And I would love it, sincerely love it, if you could all scan it and just add your names to that, because the more signatures we get, the more we can keep up the momentum. And that's really what we're sort of trying to do from today. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm involved with the temporary accommodation world at the moment.
Again, it might seem quite small and trivial in terms of the grand scale and the cost of temporary accommodation, because we're going to have our discussion with local authorities later. We know the kind of financial pressures that local authorities are on so much, but actually when we're drilling it down to what's the impact of temporary accommodation on children, and if the families can't afford the bus passes because they've been placed so far away because we're in a housing crisis, what's the small things that we can do now to mitigate the implications of being placed out of area or being placed to the other side of your borough? Sometimes that needs to happen, and for different reasons, but what can we do to support the children to do that? So thank you for pushing that campaign through, and we can, if we get it right in Greater Manchester, then everyone else can copy off us, and that's all right. And we can do it around every other combined authority, and if we tick off all the other combined authorities, all to do with these small changes, whether it's COTS or bus passes or safeguarding, then we've pretty much ticked off 80% of all homeless children. So it's about being a trailblazer, and it's about brave leadership as opposed to just about the spreadsheets and the facts and figures. So thank you. Tarah.
Hello, I'm Tarah Welsh. I am an investigative reporter, but I'm also the housing correspondent for the BBC, for BBC News. So it means that I cover everything from sort of housing targets, home building, but temporary accommodation's really been the thing that I've been most passionate about since I took the job. So I've only been in it for a year, but I've been looking at these issues. I've been at the BBC 17 years. And the reason I took this job is because most of my kind of workload ended up being housing anyway. So I was at BBC London, and so housing's arguably the biggest issue for that audience. And I've really seen like the problems change in terms of get worse. The problems are still there, but they've sort of been exacerbated over the years I've been doing my job. And obviously now I'm specifically only doing this. It's just been a massive eye-opener. And you learn things like, I didn't even know you didn't get free transport for kids, because in London it's free, right? So it's just kind of like the differences, like how much effect that we're just hearing every day. You learn something new that's like, might be housing adjacent, but it's, surprising. So love my job. Probably the piece to do with temporary accommodation that I'm most proud of was a piece that actually went out a couple of weeks ago. Because we followed one mum as she was moved over the space of a year. She's been in 4 different properties in a year, and I just went every time she moved and just filmed a little bit of the impact, and people kind of came up to me afterwards saying, oh, we didn't realise, we just didn't know. You know, you hear temporary accommodation when you do a news story, but you don't actually think that's kids living in an HMO or the practicalities of living in a hotel. So, yeah, I'd say that's probably the thing I'm most proud of this year.
Great, thank you. You'll meet the families and the children in all the different stories and articles that you write. What's the one child that has stuck out in you? What's the story that you really remember that you go, this is why we're doing it?
I mean, to go back to the original campaign, I remember speaking to someone who she was 22 and she had a child who was, I think, 8, so she was sort of starting to look at like the point of getting to secondary school, and she was worried because she'd been in temporary accommodation as well as a child, and essentially she was just essentially fearing that it would be a complete repetition. So it wasn't necessarily a child, but it was someone who lived through it and was already, at the age of 22, it did feel like a lot of her hope for life had been expunged by that point, because it was just going to be this endless cycle. You know, I was in this place, can I afford to get my child out of this? And unfortunately, she didn't think it was possible, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing the campaign at the moment.
That's actually a really hard question. I feel like, you meet so many. I guess one I think about is there's a woman, Barbara, I met who was living in a hostel, actually one of these loophole council-owned hostels in North London, with in one room with 3 children. So two were her children, a baby and an infant, like a 2-week-old or something, and a toddler, and then the other one was a teenage girl, and her niece, and she told me what I'm sure you guys hear all the time about, having to lock them in when she goes to the toilet, and not wanting to use the shared kitchen because people were using drugs in there, and sterilising the bottles, and obviously all of this was really shocking, but she delivered it with such practicality and logic. And then the only moment when she got really upset was when she talked about like the fights that she was having with the teenage niece, because it was so teenage, but it was so teenage, and that 14-year-old girl doesn't want to be in a room with these little boys and her aunt all the time, and was rebelling by going down and hanging out with the older men, and things like that. And when she talked about the fights that they were having, that felt so like me and my mum, that's so universal, a kind of daughter and mum type dynamic. And when she talked about all this awful stuff, she was just so logical, and then talking about this dynamic just really broke my heart.
Yeah, it's similar. I think, again, meet lots of children in that situation. I actually find it quite triggering, because I grew up not in temporary accommodation, but kind of overcrowded, shared a room, brother and sister. And when you see kind of young women, from 9 or 10, going through changes, wanting their own space, and the kind of mental impact that's having on them, even when you talk to them and say, I just want a place to do my homework, But I think as well as the kind of individuals that we meet, I think it's the ones we haven't met as well. And doing the work with Shared Health at the beginning of the year about the number of children that die in temporary accommodation, I think that's probably had the biggest impact, because, again, it's this hidden homeless, hidden tragedies that we just didn't know about. So I think that's probably had the biggest impact.
Which is a really interesting point, because to make change, we need to tell the stories, and we need the voices of the people that are going through this. But because they're going through such a vulnerable time in their lives, the last thing that we want to do as a third sector organisation that is supporting these families is to put them right on a pedestal, right in the media spotlight. But also, that's not what your editors want, because they need a face, they need a name, they need a story. So we have to have that delicate balance of keeping families right for anonymity, but also want to tell their story. So how does the industry tell the stories of the families to get that change, but also keeping your bosses happy of what the editors want?
Yeah, I think it's really, really complex, and it's hard because often the things that people want to tell you. They want to tell you their story, and you know that that's not potentially quite what the story your editor wants or the story the reader wants, and it is really hard, and I think it's just about, hopefully, being quite embedded in this world, embedded in these communities, being able to come to these interviews with like a lot of, authenticity and empathy, and I hope, not kind of parachuting in and extracting. I hope that they feel that it's kind of more involved than that. And then I think just being like really, really honest. I think Inside Housing is nice because we are a bit more flexible around anonymity. They don't have to be on camera or anything like that, so that makes it a lot easier when I talk to people who work in broadcast journalism. Obviously, that is a lot harder. So we've got a bit more flexibility around that, which helps. But just being really, really honest, I think the thing usually you feel worse about is when you interview someone and then it doesn't make the final cut. So I like try and avoid that as much as possible. Sometimes it does just happen, but you really try and avoid that and try and be really honest and not promise them 100% that it's going to be in print. Yeah, just trying to be really honest the whole way through. I think that's a good answer.
Yeah, I'll just pick up on what you said. It's about, I mean, obviously we're a regional paper, so we're always embedded in our community, but it's about, from my point of view, the old adage in journalism is that people like stories about people. So, and the reason why people like stories about people is because they can genuinely emote with them a lot better than just if I, give them a deluge of stats and it just sort of washes over people. So when I'm telling this sort of a story, like I think it's always about just trying to be as sensitive as we possibly can, whilst also not making it too obscure as to what we're talking about. And there's a balance to be met about being direct and saying, this is horrible, this is why, and this is what we can do about it, but also at the same time, like not completely, I guess doing sort of like a poverty porn piece, which is a very difficult balance to be met. But I think for organisations like Insider Housing and organisations like ours, we do have, I guess, the implicit trust, don't you, of like people say, oh, well, we can trust you because we know that you're not necessarily always going to do a hit piece on something. And for us, it's similar because like we can't go around and being, I guess, unethical or brash or however you want to call it, because then we've still got to speak to you in 2 weeks' time because we've existed for 160 years and we want to exist for another 160. And we all know how that works. So it's a difficult balance to be met, but I think you've got to be cognizant of like where you've come from and what you are trying to do as an organisation as well.
Yeah, I think it is different for broadcast, but as we move on to a more online world, I think it is getting actually easier to kind of say to your bosses, listen, the story's really important, someone will talk to me, but we need to have the responsibility of protecting them and their children, like particularly if there's domestic abuse involved or something like that. As you say, like the story does so much better if someone's face is on it and if you can relate to that person. And I also think it's about trust between us and yourselves, the people looking after those families, and building a relationship so you trust us to have access to those people. But I also think it's super important that especially women can tell their own stories if they want to. If they want to say how they got into this situation, how difficult it is, and they want to kind of raise awareness about it, I think we should. And there have been cases where people have wanted to do that, but for, safety reasons, we've had to not. So I think it's really tricky, it's really complex, but we try really hard to make sure, and there's the keeping in touch as well, like afterwards, the aftercare. There's not one, in fact, if you looked at my phone, it's texts from people that I might have interviewed 5 years ago with updates, and it's checking in, are the kids okay? That piece went on YouTube, so it's still out there, how do they feel about that? And actually what I find with many, and I do say women a lot, but it is mainly mothers I speak to, what I find is they're all amazing, and their kids have actually, like when I've followed them over the years, they've often, despite living in these awful conditions, they've actually been so resilient, and the kids are now amazing. So,
thank you. Last question before I open it out for the hecklers. If you do have a question, please shuffle your way over to the microphone onto the side. What can we do to support you to help tell the stories to make change? We've got everybody from local authorities, health, education, researchers, other VCSE organisations here. How can we help to shift it forward?
I'm going to ask the people who work for public sector organisations. I know it can be scary talking to a journalist, but please put yourself forward, just have a chat on background. It is so helpful. It is unbelievably helpful. I remember having a conversation with the Director of Homelessness for Manchester City Council, which, for the people who know the area, there was a big tent city outside the town hall. Got in for an hour-long briefing, and he explained exactly why it had grown up it exploded in the last 3 weeks, essentially, and it was all to do with the decision to get rid of the asylum seekers backlog queue, and that's where they're ending up. That was so informative and so useful, so we were able to tell that story so much more sensitively, especially because the council knew that this tent city wasn't going anywhere. So for the next year, we were able to always rely on that, and we were able to actually dispel a lot of disinformation and misinformation from people who were visiting the city, people who were filming it as these so-called auditors, essentially out to cause trouble. So if you are an officer, an authority, and I email the press office and I say, can I have a chat with an officer about this, just on background? If you say yes, it will help me massively, and also it will help you massively as well, because you're able to then not get your side of the story of it, but you're able to give it so much more context because you live and breathe it in a way that, unfortunately, because I've got a lot of demands on my time, and I'm sure all three of us do, I can't live and breathe it in the same way. So I think that's my sort of ask for you, is don't be scared, we will be nice, and we will be able to produce a better and more informed story overall together.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I was going to say, I guess one of the things I really like about Inside Housing is obviously because we're read by the sector, we're quite solutions driven. So we always really like to kind of show work that's being done, projects that are happening. And what drives me absolutely bonkers is people emailing when the project is done, wanting me to write a story about how everything was perfect and it all went amazing. And I think, who learns from that? Could you not have invited me while it was going on to learn with you? And no one really learns from just reading your press release from the end of the project about how there was no bumps in the road and everything was perfect. I'm always beseeching people to just invite us earlier and be a little bit, I guess, up for letting me see some of the actual challenges that these projects have, so that other people can properly learn from them.
Yeah, I think I would support both those points, and I know that Sean's here today, and we were on a panel. Hello, Sean, sorry to single you out. We were on a panel a few weeks ago together, and Sean was talking about this project. I don't know if you spoke about that today in Greenwich. Yeah, sorry, I missed them. I was like, oh, okay, zip it.
Spoiler
okay.
alerts.
There's something.
It's coming.
There's something brilliant you're going to see in a minute. It's a project that Sean was talking about on this panel, and I thought, it would have been really nice to see some of that process and invite us in, like you say, maybe to say, listen, don't pick up the cameras today, just come and have a look, nothing on the record, and then next time, if we like you and trust you, you can come back and maybe chat to some parents. Then the time after, maybe filming once you've built a relationship. And that kind of longevity of a relationship would really help. And similarly, with the background stuff, being a journalist at the moment, in this climate, when everyone's screaming at each other and it's all about politics, is trying to find the nub of the truth is what do they say, when you're in syrup, it's there's a saying for it, but it's really hard to try and get at the truth and accuracy. And I think to have some of those background chats, because especially for the BBC, we've got to be really, I'm not saying that no one else is, but I mean, we can't do campaign journalism. We quite just want to get to the point. And so to try and have those background chats, I think would be really helpful. So I'll give you my number at the end of the session, and feel free to get in touch.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Right, who has a question for our esteemed journalist? Please make your way over to the Q&A microphone on the side.
Mine's just around the transport. We have many issues in school around children not being able to access this transport. We are a very, very small school, and we do not have the funding to then pay for a child to come to school on the buses. Can I ask, when you're talking to Andy Burnham, you talk to him about it not coming out of school budgets. School budgets are so stretched now. We feed people, we clothe people, we do, we refer them to health services, we do everything. But also, it's not about just the child. When they're in primary school, they can't get a bus on their own. The parent needs to accompany that child as well. But also, while we're talking about SEND children, if they then have to move schools, the process of assessment has to start all over again. And we need them to stay in school because it can take 3 years to actually get that assessment process done. But as a school, we cannot afford to pay for it because we're paying for every, you know, my role as a parent support advisor is paid for all that. We're dealing with housing, we have food, we have a fruit and veg thing where they come and pay £2, you know, and they come and get all that. We do, you know, clothes swaps, we do, you know, at the moment we're doing a coat one, you know, we're doing uniform, we're doing everything we can as a school, but please don't ask us then to pay for transport because we do not have the funding. So that's all. So.
Well, and what I can say is the request that we've got is that it comes for essentially is that they waive the administration fees for existing B network passes. So it's already a mechanism. It's just essentially zero, making that price zero. So the idea is not to put the pressure back on the schools. The idea is to essentially change some numbers on a spreadsheet within TFGM. Yeah. That's how it works. Whereabouts is your school?
In Chorlton.
In Chorlton, right? Okay. Yeah. So you'll know this as well.
And the trams as well. You know, some children need to get trams. If that could be, it's not just a bus, it's a tram. But also, you know, the asylum seekers as well. They can't. They're given schools that are miles away, as well, and then they can't get to school. And Serco won't pay for that. You know, they're saying the schools should pay for that, and it ends up. It's not fair on the kids. You know, we have staff paying for children out their own pocket, you know, and that's just, it's not fair. I think, you know, we're penalising all these kids and we're there to support them. So that's it, thank you.
Thank you again, and also if you want to email me, please do, because all the information is really, really helpful from everyone here, because again, you all know better than me.
Thanks, Ethan. I think we're out of time, so you might need to shuffle off to it. But
thank you very much for having me.
We'll have a couple more questions, but we could just give Ethan a round of applause as he heads. Thank you. And we're going to email the bus campaign details out, so if everyone can sign that and tell our. We can send our email. Yes. Okay. Great. We'll send all the contact details around. So if you've got any new stories, if you've got any kind of new trends or new threads that are happening, then please share. Oh, there we go. As if by magic. Please sign it now. Rosalie, off you go.
Hello. I'm Rosalie. Tara, I don't think you were here earlier, but I'm working on the Sensory Lives project. So we're looking at the impacts of living in TA on neurodivergent children and their families. So my request is to think beyond housing. So it's great that we've got so many people from multidisciplinary backgrounds here, but particularly, I know Louise has mentioned this as well, for example, like disabled children. It's not just housing, it needs to be thought of as well in relation to EHCPs and dropping off waiting lists and moving boroughs and all those extra things. That would be my call, is to kind of think holistically. Like, I know it's really hard when there's a housing team and an education team, but to think holistically about collaborative articles and stuff that can get the nuance of how those things intersect, so we can think about that in relation to the child poverty strategy or education or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I think that's a great point. And one of the nice things we've really noticed at Inside Housing is we really have seen that buy-in, that kind of cross-departmental buy-in to the journalism that we do. But I've definitely found, I don't know if you find this, but when I've worked at nationals on kind of the housing desk, even getting them to cover anything that isn't home ownership is kind of a battle. Getting them to go beyond interest rates was kind of, anything I did on private renters was kind of a hard sell. So I don't know about the BBC at all, but yeah, in my experience, it's quite even a bigger battle than that even.
I think not to kind of pass the buck and push it back on you at all, because I feel your frustration. She got on. Hello. Yeah, I kind of feel your frustration, because I do a story and I say to the editors, I've got something for you. They go, how long is it? And I go, 19 minutes. They go, you've got 45 seconds. Do you know what I mean, to tell this story? And so I want every story to be a documentary and to really get to those kind of issues. But especially with TV, if you think the 6 o'clock news, it's half an hour, you've got the whole world. to cover. So you're getting 2 minutes and you're not going to get the kind of that depth of nuance. However, like I say, with online, within the in-depth section, there are ways to do that. But I think it does need those conversations to happen, so you can almost tell us what you think is the top line, what you think is the kind of key to it, because you guys are the experts, and that's why, like we said, those relationships and those, that background's so important.
Thank you, Isla.
Hello, thank you so much for your time on this panel, really valuable. My name's Isla and I'm from the Greater Manchester Homelessness Action Network. I have a question that I think was kind of referenced maybe slightly earlier when you were mentioning about the fact that it feels like we're in a world where everyone's shouting at each other. And I think that with the work that you do, like say you put out a piece of work that is really well intentioned and incredibly sympathetic and sensitive, you could still have lurking in those comment sections a vocal minority of people that are going to get whipped up into a frenzy. A lot of the organisations that I work with then feel the tremors of that, and ultimately with the people that we support as well, those tremors are felt. So I guess that the question's twofold. How do you sort of manage when that comes about, even as a result of like really sensitive reporting? And equally, how do you think that we as like frontline organisations could help to manage and mitigate that when it happens, if there is anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, and I'm surprised how many people, I speak to a mother in temporary accommodation, for example, and she'll be like, oh, what do you think people are going to say in the comments? It's inside house, it's not really that kind of journalism. But her experience is she's maybe had friends who have gone to something a bit more tabloidy, something that gets shared on Facebook, and the comments will be like, why have so many kids, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I'm always kind of taken aback by that, but obviously it's a very real risk that they feel too, and I'm always kind of a bit honoured that they were going to do it anyway, even though they thought that might happen. So I think it's just about real honesty with the organisation and with the person about the risks. I would say from our side the risks are maybe not that so much, but we might talk about the risks that their landlord or the local council might. There's always a risk they might act punitively against that person for speaking out. Obviously they shouldn't, but so we kind of just speak really honestly about those risks ahead of time, and kind of hope that that's enough. And then fingers crossed for the best, I guess. And like you said, that aftercare I think is really, really, really crucial as well.
Yeah, I've seen some horrible examples actually, and we really talk about that a lot now. So there's practical things you can do, like turning comments off. Mm-hmm. Obviously, once it's out there, it doesn't stop people kind of with big followings putting it out themselves, and there being comments that are disgusting. But so you can have those conversations with organisations, and most importantly the families, like beforehand. And one thing that I think we can do is, because there'll be people with, I think what I've learned from doing this job is how little people understand how the housing system works and how we got here. Like, that's not to knock people, like I didn't know, do you know what I mean? And I've like lived it, the social housing system. So I think some of those comments come in ignorance. And I think sometimes you could ask a question that's a difficult question to that family. Like a question is, some people might say X, Y, or Z, and prepare that family for that question. So there it is, it's in the clip. Are you happy, commenters? We asked what you're saying, and mum or dad said why. Do you know what I mean? I think that's sometimes a way around it, but definitely those practical things and the discussions beforehand really help, yeah.
Thank you both for your time today. Thank you for making the schlep up north to Manchester. Really appreciate it. Everyone, please put your hands together for our...
I'm just going to say that when I started with Shared Health on this kind of work, I was really cynical about the media, but I've worked with both these wonderful ladies and other reporters, and I have to say I'd encourage you to build relationship. So I think the first time I met Tarah, I was probably a bit of an arse, because that once you understand their world and they understand yours, it gets easier. But, you know, their editors, we were doing the story about the number of children who died in temporary accommodation, and that story will come again in January when we have the new data release. And what the editors really want is a mum that's lost a baby. And that's really difficult for us to, even if we have it, to give. And so I was kind of very protective, and I'm a public sector worker, and I do confidentiality, and I safeguard the world, and it's all my responsibility. And it was through building relationship that I was like, actually, they know what they're doing. You know, like, they'd come to me as a doctor, and they trust me what I say most of the time. And I'm going to them as journalists in really good organisations, and I trust them. And so that's been really powerful. Does that make sense? And you have to kind of run with it a bit. So sometimes we've done stories and they've not been published, and Tarah goes, well, it was going to go, but then Trump said something, or Elon did this, or, you know, I don't know, an elephant escaped the zoo, or, you know, it's just mad journalism. I don't know how they do their jobs. And you just kind of roll with that, and that's part of the deal. But I would encourage us, if we want to tell the story of homelessness in a nuanced way, with all the difficulty that we've been talking about, and we'll carry on talking about this afternoon, like, we have to have partners in the media who will do that with us. Does that make sense? Otherwise, you just get the same tropes. And not using the media, I can say that, can't I? But working with the media to change government policy is profound, because they read it all, and they are consumed by it all. And so if you can build up those partnerships, it's really worth doing. Does that make sense? There's definitely journalists I wouldn't work with, but there's many more of them who I've met, who I've gone, they're solid, they work hard, they've got kids, they've got the dog at the vet's, they're trying to work out how to get across the country on crap public transport. Like, just build a relationship with them. Is that okay?